Third, the conduct and management of examination in the subject was not compromised. We must accept that there is no system that is flawless. We are, however, satisfied that whatever examination challenges there might have been in this year's examination processes, they were not systemic and were effectively and adequately dealt with by the respective assessment bodies. In order to make this determination, there are various quality assurance measures that must be carried out. These are moderation and approval of question papers, verification of the moderation of internal assessments, monitoring of the conduct of examinations, monitoring of the marking process, verification of marking, and the standardization of the results. With regard to marking, Umalusi conducted the monitoring of marker selection and related processes with a view to improve the practices followed by various provincial departments of education. Also, Umalusi conducted an audit of appointed markers in the 9 provincial departments of education. Furthermore, Umalusi observed the following processes in the provinces visited: the process of marker selection, the training of various levels of markers. Lastly, in general, provincial departments of education adhered to the criteria for the appointment of markers as stated in the Education Labor Relations Council, ELRC, Resolution number 6 of 1997, as amended in 2001. Also, there was notable improvement in the manner in which the memorandum discussion meetings were conducted. This year, the South African Comprehensive Assessment Institute, Sakai, which is an independent assessment body provisionally accredited by Umalusi to administer the National Senior Certificate Examinations, administered its National Senior Certificate Examinations for the second time this year. Sakai administered its first National Senior Certificate Examinations in 2014, and its 2015 results were also subjected to Umalusi's quality assurance processes, which will of course include the standardization process. Another independent assessment body, Benchmark, which is also in the process of obtaining accreditation from Umalusi, completed a pilot for its second GETC examinations in November. Benchmark results were also subjected to Umalusi's quality assurance processes, which include the standardization process. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. Please join me in welcoming Umalusi's Chair of Council, Professor John Volming, to deliberate on Umalusi's findings and his conclusions regarding the IEB, Sakai, Benchmark, the Department of Basic Education, and the Department of Higher Education and Training 2015 examinations. I thank you. Over to you, Prof. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rakometsi. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. So, Dr. Rakometsi has outlined the work of Umalusi as stipulated in the Gen-FETQA Act. And I'm here to tell you what decisions we've made and to answer questions that you may have. I think it's important just to say at the beginning that central to the mandate of Umalusi is the responsibility to assure the quality of assessment at exit points and to issue certificates to successful candidates. So I want to say over the last 10 days or so, commencing on the 17th of December, the Assessment Standards Committee of Umalusi, a body of 13 people, not all of them are here, 13 educational professionals, statisticians, etc., had been hard at work reviewing and moderating learner performance in the qualifications as outlined by Dr. Akumeti. So, I shall deal with the approval decisions per qualification, starting with the National Senior Certificate. Now, the NSC is offered by 3 assessment bodies. So, Department of Basic Education is one, the IEB, and they released their results today, after we had approved the release 2 days ago, and the South African Comprehensive Assessment Institute, Sakai. They also have been approved 2 days ago. So let me focus on the DBE. You heard Dr. Akumeti say that there was a bumper number of 674,232 full-time candidates and another over 127,000 part-time candidates that wrote the NSC exams. That was administered by the DBE. Now, so I'll get straight to it. A total of 59 subjects were presented for standardization. After moderation, raw marks were accepted for only 29 of these subjects. And that represents 49% of all the subjects. Upward adjustments were made on the remaining 30 subjects. When I say upward adjustment, it means moderation with some upward shifts to the average historical learner performance profile. That's what we mean. I'll name the 29 subjects, and you will notice that many of them are high enrollment subjects. In fact, all the high enrollment subjects were adjusted upwards. So these are physical science, mathematical literacy, life sciences, mathematics, geography, history, hospitality studies, agricultural management practices, agricultural technology, agricultural science, information technology, civil technology, dramatic arts, accounting, business studies, economics, English home language, English first additional language, Afrikaans home language, Afrikaans first additional language, isiZulu home language, Siswati home language, isiNdebele home language, Sepedi home language, Sepedi first additional language, Sesotho home language, Setswana home language, Tshivenda home language, and Tsonga home language. Those were all adjusted upwards. Now, just to get an idea, if we compare what I've just said with the decisions we made in 2014. In 2014, a total of 58 subjects were presented for standardization. And after moderation, raw marks were accepted for 35 subjects in 2014. And that represents 60% of the subjects. Of the remaining 23 subjects, 13 had upward shifts and 10 had downward shifts. So compared to this year, we had 29 raw and 30, the remaining 30 were all upward shifts. It's therefore clear, and I'm sure the question arises in your mind, that to warrant this year's unprecedented set of adjustments, the learner performance in 2015 must have departed quite significantly from the average historical learner performance profile. Together with the DBE, we are in the process of identifying the possible causal factors that led to this performance. And I'm confident that the lessons that will be learned in this process would put us in a better position to ensure that the class of 2016 would not be disadvantaged in any way. So given the radical departure from the past trends, it's perhaps important to highlight some possible factors. I'm not saying they're probable, but they are possible. And I would like to just address a few of them that may have affected the learner performance this year. Firstly, there's a cohort change. We heard Dr. Rakometsi point out that there was a drastic increase of 124,105 in the enrollment of candidates, full-time candidates, in the class of 2015. Now of those, 66,088 were progress learners. That's 10% of the total cohort. So there's a cohort difference, 2014-2015. Now, I need to say something about this notion of progress learners. The policy on progression was implemented in 2013, not in 2015. So it's not new in that sense. And it was implemented to prevent learners being retained in the same phase for more than 4 years. So each phase is 3 years. Foundation phase and then intermediate phase, they're all 3 years. And some learners were kept in those phases for 4 years and more. However, this policy was unevenly implemented across the provinces. In 2014, that is last year, in the cohort that we had considered last year, there was an estimated 30,000 progress learners writing the NSC examination. And that represents 5.5% of the cohort of last year, for all progress learners. So in an attempt to offset the possible negative impacts of the 2015 NSC results that these learners may have, the Department of Basic Education and the provincial education departments provided targeted support and interventions for the progress learners at both district and provincial level. Umalusi has taken note of that and of the evidence-based reports on interventions and improvement strategies implemented by both national and provincial education authorities for learners in general, but also specifically for progress learners. Our analysis, based on the raw scores of the 2015 results, demonstrates that the performance of progress learners account for an increase in the failure of at most 3.5%. So that's the first thing I want to say. In most of the high enrollment subjects, however, it's important to note that the increased failure rate compared to 2014 exceeds 3.5%. In other words, if we exclude the progress learners, the class of 2015 still performed much worse than the class of 2014. The drop in performance is particularly pronounced in certain subjects. Let me name just a few: accounting, geography, history, and mathematical literacy, where the results are quite big. The deficit is quite big. The conclusion that can be drawn here is that while the performance of the progress learners has led to an increase in the failure rate, in 2015 it does not fully explain the drop in performance. In other words, we can't blame the progress learners for the huge drop in performance from 2014 from 2014 to 2015. Allow me just to point out, it was very pleasing when we did the analysis to see that a number of the so-called progress learners obtained a distinction pass in the gateway subjects. Just on the raw score, I'm not talking about the adjusted score. 50 distinctions came from the progress learners in accounting. 77 of them obtained a distinction in mathematics. And 43 of them obtained a distinction in physical science and 83 in life sciences. So in that group of progress learners, there are distinctions material. Having concluded that the performance of progress learners was not the only contributing factor leading to the poorer performance of the class of 2015, I'm sure you're asking what else could have been contributing factors. So let me just name a few quickly. Cognitive demand of the question papers. Generally, by design, the standard of the papers have improved this year and catered for more challenging questions as compared to 2014. It can be argued, however, that the standard of the question papers were too high, as some argue. This may very well be the case. However, the reports from the DBE internal moderators, as well as those from Umalusi external moderators, do not support the view that the papers were too hard. These reports all indicate that with single exceptions, the papers were fair and set at the correct standard in accordance with the subject assessment guidelines set by the Department of Basic Education. Nevertheless, Umalusi will remain open to that possibility that the standard of the papers was a contributing factor to this year's performance, and we will not be defensive about that. But we must ensure, and we will not let go of that commitment, that the standards of the papers cannot be dropped in order to improve just the failure rate. So the performance in the NSC across all the points, all the levels, not just one point, is one of the most critical indicators of the system of improvement. In other words, if you want to see whether the system is improved, you cannot only look at the failure rate. You have to look at all the other points. Umalusi cannot improve the quality of education by lowering the bar, and it cannot improve the quality of education on graph paper. It can only happen in the classroom by improving teaching and learning. Another factor may be the improved marking. The quality of marking is a very important aspect of the integrity and credibility of the examination. It is therefore pleasing to see the measures put in place by the Department of Basic Education to carefully select and train markers. Also, the tolerance range of 2 to 3% for markers limited the wild fluctuations in marking that we saw in previous years. Although there is still much room for improvement, the enhancement in the quality of marking must render a more accurate estimation of learner performance. Another one may be the more borderline candidates that got into grade 12. If you look at the data provided by the DBE, it would appear that in 2014, fewer learners were retained in grade 11 than other years. This could mean that more borderline learners entered grade 12 this year, who, together with the progress learners, led to a weaker cohort. Could be. And then just two more: increased vigilance. The DBE and the provincial education departments have enhanced their measures of vigilance to prevent the incidences of mass copying we saw this year, last year. Although acts of dishonesty still exist, it was far less pervasive this year than in 2014, and I will come to that in a minute. I want to say some of the measures that's put in place was intensive monitoring by the department. The department also categorized the exam centers in high risk, medium risk and low risk, and they were managed differently. And then they did national invigilator training. Now, the increased vigilance, and in other words, more honesty in the system, could also have been a contributing factor to the lower performance this year. Finally, language proficiency. In 2014, the language compensation policy of Umalusi for certain learners meant that the compensation decreased from 5% to 4% last year. And this year it was reduced by a further percentage point. And in each year, that will happen for the next 3 years until it has phased out. It remains true, however, that candidates writing the examination in a language other than their home language continue to experience great difficulty in interpreting questions and phrasing their responses. Umalusi therefore applauds the development of the framework for strengthening the teaching and learning of languages, which acts as an overarching guide to improve language proficiency in all languages, including English. And we were particularly pleased to see the strategy on teaching English across the curriculum that has been developed and implemented by the DBE in all provinces. However, it remains a challenge that many of the subjects are extremely language-laden, and some question papers run into tens of pages, and candidates experience great difficulty in coping with the language demands and still finishing on time. Let me just address lastly the issue of irregularities. Umalusi conducts not only the process of standardization, which was outlined by Dr. Rakumetsi, and that is required for national examinations, but it also, through rigorous procedures, assures the quality and integrity of the entire examination process. So gaining the approval of Umalusi Council for the release of the results is determined by the examination's level of compliance with policies, directives and guidelines issued by both Umalusi and each of the assessment bodies. And so before we grant approval, Umalusi Council has to satisfy itself that no systemic irregularities, as said by Dr. Rakumetsi, have occurred to undermine the integrity and the credibility of the examination. In 2014, the NSC examinations was tarnished, the credibility was tarnished by group copying. It is common knowledge by now that this year the system had to deal with most unfortunate incidents of paper leakages. And that happened in Limpopo, which ultimately spilled over to Gauteng and Mpumalanga. In the main, life sciences papers 1 and 2 were affected by the leakage. And it started with information regarding an alleged leakage of the life sciences paper 2 that was received by the DBE on the 16th of November 2015. And that happened just before the writing of the examination. Investigations by a task team established to identify the source of the security breach and the extent of the spread of access to those question papers confirmed the leakages in life sciences paper 1 and 2, and very limited access also in geography paper 2 and physical science paper 2 by 2 or 3 learners. Umalusi thanks the DBE for the swift and decisive action taken to limit the spread of the leakage. And as a result, all learners in Vembe district in Limpopo were required to rewrite life sciences papers 1 and 2. Umalusi is very concerned about this trend and takes the view that strong action must be taken against those learners and officials who have made themselves guilty of these acts of dishonesty. And we will therefore not approve the release of the results of all the identified culprits in the Vhembe district and in Gauteng and in Mpumalanga. The investigation is still continuing. In the meantime, 19 candidates in the Vhembe district, 3 candidates in Mpumalanga, and 4 candidates in Gauteng were identified as implicated individuals. Furthermore, 1 suspect in Limpopo was arrested and charged with fraud, and another suspect in Gauteng was also arrested. Another issue, it is with bitter disappointment that we note that the evidence provided by the DBE indicates that the phenomenon of group copying that we were struggling with last year has not been completely eliminated. This year has seen a number of new schools being implicated in group copying. However, we also acknowledge at the same time the significant reduction in the number of alleged cases compared to 2014 and the functional system of vigilance that has been set up by the department. I just want to report that to date, a total of 26 new alleged cases of group copying have been reported in the following provinces. In Gauteng, 6. KwaZulu-Natal, 12. Limpopo, 1. Mpumalanga, 7. Further investigations are underway, and the results from all the implicated centres will remain blocked. We want to extend a serious warning to those who are implicated that drastic measures will be taken against them. Irregularities occur in all examinations and assessments, and the examination system has mechanisms to manage irregularities, to identify them, and to avoid lapses in examination credibility. However, whether an irregularity becomes a threat to the system depends, as Dr. Rakometsi has said, on the nature and the extent of the irregularity, whether it is systemic or not. And so, it gives me pleasure to say that having studied all the evidence at hand on the management and conduct of the National Senior Certificate Examinations administered by the Department of Basic Education, Umalusi is satisfied that nothing has compromised the integrity or credibility of the examinations process. Notwithstanding the areas of concern requiring improvement, we are satisfied that the examinations on the whole were fair and valid and credible. We want to commend the DBE for running a successful and credible examinations process, and so accordingly, we hereby approve the release of the results of the National Senior Certificate Examinations administered by the Department of Basic Education. So just allow me to say a few words about the other qualifications. The National Senior Certificate Exam by the IEB, you've heard that being released today. In total, 10,212 full-time candidates and 563 part-time candidates were enrolled by the IEB for NSC exams. A total of 64 subjects were presented to Umalusi for standardization, and after moderation, raw marks were accepted for 52 out of those 64 subjects, and that represents 81.25% of all the subjects for which raw marks were accepted for the IEB. Moderation with some downward shifts were done on the remaining 12 subjects. And so Umalusi approved the results of the National Senior Certificate for the IEB on the 28th of December for the release on a time and date of its choosing. Then there is Sakai, the South African Comprehensive Assessment Institute, who also offers a National Senior Certificate. They had 1,075 full-time candidates and 527 part-time candidates who were enrolled for the NSC. A total of they presented 27 subjects for standardization, and raw marks were accepted for 24 out of the 27, which represents 88.8%. Of the remaining 3 subjects, upward shifts was effected on 2 subjects, and 1 adjusted mainly downwards. And so for Sakai, we say Umalusi is also satisfied that nothing has compromised the integrity or credibility of the examinations process, and consequently on the 28th of December 2015, we have approved the release of the results of the NSC administered by Sakai on a date to be determined by Sakai. Then there is the General Education and Training Certificate, Abet Level 4, administered by the DHET. In total, 225,144 candidates were enrolled for the GTC Abet Level 4, administered by the Department of Higher Education and Training. 26 learning areas were presented for standardization, and of the 26 learning areas, raw marks were accepted for 11. Moderation with some downward shifts towards the average was effected on 6 learning areas, and moderation with some upward shifts towards the average was effected on 10 subjects. Umalusi, however, and we want to stress this, remains concerned with the overall poor performance of candidates in the GTC exam, Abet Level 4, administered by the DHET. Our final decision is as follows. On the basis of its monitoring and moderation processes and the evidence before it, Umalusi is satisfied that there were no serious irregularities that could undermine the credibility of the examinations. The Council is therefore of the opinion that the examinations was conducted in a credible manner, and therefore approves the release of the results of the GTC Abet Level 4 administered by the DHET. Then the GTC Abet Level 4 is also administered by the IEB. They had 1,464 candidates who sat for the GTC examination, and 8 learning areas were presented for standardization, and following moderation, raw marks were accepted in all 8 learning areas. And having studied all the evidence at hand, Umalusi is satisfied that nothing has compromised the integrity of that examination, and consequently has approved the release of the results. There's another assessment body called Benchmark. They had 461 candidates that were enrolled for the GTC Abet Level 4. A total of 2 learning areas were presented for standardization, and after moderation, raw marks were accepted for the 2 learning areas, and we have also approved the release of the results of the benchmark. Finally, the DHET has other examinations, the NCV levels 2 to 4, and the Nated N2 and N3. For the NCV, the National Certificate Vocational, levels 2 to 4, a total of 183,125 candidates were enrolled for the 2015 NCV levels 2 to 4. A total of 252 subjects, with 84 on level 2 and 84 on level 3 and 84 on level 4, were subjected to the standardization process. Raw marks were accepted for 122 subjects, which represents 48.4%, while moderation with some downward shifts towards the average historical learner performance were effected on 2 subjects, and moderation with some upward shifts towards the average historical learner performance were effected on 127 subjects, and 1 subject, no decision was taken due to low capture rate. The percentage of raw marks accepted not only indicates a stabilizing qualification, but also attests to the accuracy of the Umalusi standardization decisions over the last few years. The Nated N2 to N3, a total of 111,995 candidates sat for the N2, N3. 63 subjects were presented for standardization, and of the 62 subjects, raw marks were accepted for 31 subjects, 30 were adjusted mainly upwards, and 1 subject was adjusted mainly downwards. 1 subject was not standardized pending the outcome of an investigation, and another subject, industrial orientation N3, is pending the outcome of an investigation of the market qualifications. In the meantime, the Umalusi Council has studied the results of the November 2015 NCV levels 2 to 4 and the Nated N2 to N3 examinations submitted by the DET and has approved the release of the results for NCV levels 2 to 4 and Nated 2 to 3, N2 and N3. Based on the evidence before it, Umalusi is of the opinion that the examinations were conducted in a credible manner. So this brings us to the end of the presentation on the release of the results. Remains for me to thank the CEO, Dr. Rakometsi, and for his excellent leadership, and all the Umalusi senior managers sitting here at the table, and the staff who worked tirelessly and against stringent timelines to deliver the best for the country. I would also like to thank all the members of the Assessment Standards Committee for a job well done. We have a wonderful new Assessment Standards Committee under the leadership of Dr. Ruth Mampani sitting on my left, with a healthy mixture of youth and experience. And I would however, be remiss not to acknowledge the experience in the role played by Professor Moon Moodley and Professor Paul Fatty, who over the many years have mentored us and guided us to make the best possible decision. On behalf of the Umalusi Council, I wish to extend our hearty congratulations to all the learners who have done well in the examinations this year. Warm congratulations also to their teachers and parents and guardians, and all those who have supported these learners in their studies. And to those who have not succeeded this year, there's always another chance for you next year. Work hard and do well next year. We wish you all the best for 2016. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.